All right. So I was looking at this article again by Elliot Temple on his elliotemple.com site. He has some longer form essays, and this is one of the ones that he said was one of his favorites. Liberalism, Reason, Peace, and Property. And I'm just going to read a couple parts and comment because I was rereading it and I had some thoughts. So, big picture, he's talking about liberalism, meaning classical liberalism. It's what most people would probably think of this as, not modern left liberalism. But anyway, so he's talking about that philosophy at a very high level as being favoring reason in life and contrasting it with violence. The archenemy of reason in life is violence, so liberalism seeks the peaceful coexistence of men, which is inclusive. This is like the old school use of men. In any case, so Elliot says violence overrules men's minds by preventing them from acting according to their own judgment, and that men use violence when their ideas aren't powerful enough and they're intolerant of disagreement with those inadequate ideas. Now, it's a common view that we should use the government to take money ultimately by force, because that's was resting behind the power of taxation from billionaires and maybe millionaires, or at least the upper tier of millionaires. I don't know where people cut it off, but maybe they don't want to take a ton of money from just a millionaire. He just has a million, although some of them do, but regardless. Um, Basically, take the wealth of the rich people and use it to pay for, whatever. Uh, Childcare, infrastructure, healthcare, reparations, like, people have a long list of that sort of thing. Now, obviously, a lot of millionaires and billionaires, rich people, have their own ideas about how their money should be spent. And I think the framing of wanting to use, if you want to use violence in such a situation when you can't persuade somebody, then you're intolerant. I think that's an interesting framing. I don't think, I don't think that's a thought that occurs to a lot of people who advocate using force to transfer wealth from rich people. Like they just think, well, I'm good hearted. I'm trying to help people. But I think intolerant. You see, I was reading through the essay and I was trying to find all the stuff that's kind of stuck out to me. Because often, like, I agree with a lot of what Elliot writes. So I'm like, okay, I agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's from Rand or whatever. Um, but then intolerance sort of stuck out to me, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. And I've read this before, but not in some time. Um, but anyway, so yeah, if you have idea X for how some wealth should be used, and the person who has that wealth has idea Y, and you want to have the government hit them with sticks in order to get your idea enforced, or have the government take money from them under threat of sticks, then you are not acting, you're not tolerant of the disagreement of how to use that money. And I don't see how. It's one of those things where, having thought it through, I sort of don't understand how anyone could not see that, even though it's not how I would have framed it before I reread this essay a few minutes ago. Um, so I'm not saying it's actually obvious, but it's like, well, but once you think about it, then it kind of seems obvious. Now, there's of course an issue of, well, but what about the essential functions of government? So in that case, like, I mean, one thing to think about is like it's a different case, like an expansion of, I don't know, like some program or having, uh, making something, or a totally new program or whatever, that doesn't currently exist is obviously it's not an essential function because we have a functioning society without it. And some people think it'd be nice to add, like, oh, it's like, an upgrade, but it's not. It's clearly not an essential function. If you get rid of the police totally tomorrow, which I know some people want to do, but then you would discover that there's a qualitative difference between a lack of police and a lack of, universal pre-K or whatever. Um, I do think though there's still an issue there, because like suppose you have somebody who really opposes funding the police or the military, and there are such people. It would be a better situation if we could figure out how to organize society in such a way where the funding mechanism for those services was more voluntary. So it's not perfect, and there is an issue there. And the fact that there's an issue even in those things is kind of a reason for trying to keep the scope of government very, very limited. Because even in those functions that the overwhelming majority of people, outside, a handful of people on the sort of the with views that are more fringe, uh, would consider essential functions of government, even on those points, some people might disagree and, with funding that stuff and feel violated. So let's not endlessly expand and multiply the points of disagreement and coercion and alienation by having government get involved in stuff that, it is clearly, I think, optional, even if you think it would be, a nice thing to have. Another thing is that a lot of these things, like you can solicit donations for, I don't know, pre-K for underprivileged people or whatever. You could have a nonprofit group. That's something that the structure of our society permits you, and the nature of the project permits you to organize to try and provide voluntarily, which, some of the things that the government does, sort of by their nature, they don't permit that. Like, you can't organize a private military or, like, and you can have private security, but the police are a little different. So there's some differences there too. Anyway, that was a big tangent. Something else I wanted to comment on, or not really a tangent, but I went deeper on that than I expected to. So Elliot says he's talking about two fundamentally there are two related freedoms: to think and to live. The freedom to think is a requirement for a rational world. It gives people the opportunity to think rationally. It means that you can think for yourself, you have your own ideas without violent suppression. The freedom to live means being free to keep yourself alive, for example, by hunting and eating. Being free to think and live doesn't mean that you will succeed. Nature may put obstacles in your way, like storms or diseases, or that anyone has to help you, but you and others are free to cooperate. It just means you won't be stopped by violence. Now, so I'm going to underscore this part. Being free to think and live doesn't mean you will succeed. So I've heard people argue along the lines of like, well, what good is freedom if you don't have a place to live, a place to sleep, food to eat? Like, I've heard people say stuff very closely approximating that, if not literally that, certainly that sentiment. Um, and so they want government to step in. Of course, government can't actually like they want some sort of government guarantee of those things, which government can't actually provide. It can like redistribute the fruit of other people's labors, but it it can't actually, somebody still has to wrestle with reality, and if government uh, sufficiently destroys the incentives for people to do that by plundering them, then people may choose to stop doing that on a large scale, and then you have civilizational collapse and starvation. But anyway, um, there's there's something I was thinking of though while reading this and thinking about that argument that I've heard, or that sentiment. Well, what's what good is freedom if you don't have a place to sleep or food to eat? And I imagined somebody saying that to a slave, and because if you were a slave, you might not have you by definition didn't have freedom, and you might be subject to brutal conditions, but you would have, you know, unless you had an incredibly cruel and particularly short-sighted quote unquote owner, and such did exist. So I'm not saying that's not a thing, but absent that, you would have a place to sleep and food to eat. And so, but just imagining people expressing that idea in that context, I think, kind of makes the point clear, which is like it's an outrageously anti-freedom attitude that essentially places no value on freedom, and no sort of trust in the general ability of people to deal with the world and deal with reality. And so it seems pretty hard to me, that the perspective that would ask that sort of question. Like if you accept that humans are by and large capable and competent and able to make their own choices and pursue their own values, then freedom means the freedom to do that, and to live your own life essentially. And that's worth a hell of a lot more than, you know, a guaranteed bowl of gruel, like I don't know. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say regarding the rich people and taking their money is that many rich people are quite willing to part with their money, and to do so uh, in support of projects which are often, compatible with left wing values. Like, I forget how many billions Bezos is spending on climate change or whatever. But so, like, if you can't convince them of the value of your project, maybe there's a reason for that. And like, but people don't want to do things on a voluntary basis, or they say, well, to actually fund it, we need large scale government support. They also say that the rich people have all the money, but then at the same time, we need, for some reason, government taking money from, most people. Uh, so there's some like tension there. Like they talk about soaking the rich, but then it's not rich people by and large that are getting screwed by like Obamacare, So it's middle class people. All right, I think that's it for this video.